happening, YouTube? Nuke Scout here again with another project that I got going on. I thought you guys might be interested in. This may be something cool for those of you who do hot rods, you do off-road vehicles and whatnot. What I'm looking at doing is I got these GTO seats out of a 2006 Pontiac GTO. So these are the nice 8-way power seats. And I'm going to put them into my 73 Scout 2. Just a great way to upgrade the interior and make it a whole lot more drivable and rideable. Okay, so just a little bit about these seats. I had a friend that had bought these from a junkyard, and they didn't end up fitting in his vehicle that he was looking at putting them into, and so I inherited from him / bought. And just a couple of things about when you're buying seats in regards to kind of a retrofit decision. The Scout that I'm putting these into, there's all kinds of room, but oftentimes what you run into is just some basic size constraints. When you're looking to retrofit a set of seats, you know, the width from side to side and whether that fits inside of your vehicle is an important thing with your center console and whatnot. And then also the front to rear, and that also plays into the fact that these will slide forward and back, and you need to make sure that you have adequate room for all that to happen. Now, these are also pretty high back seats, much higher than what's in there in my vehicle right now. But this is also something to keep in mind, and it's also something to keep in mind once you get them in and begin the mounting process, to make sure that when they have full articulation in one direction or the other, they're not running into different things inside of your interior. Now, the other silly thing to think of that oftentimes gets missed is, so these GTO seats, the GTO is a two-door vehicle, and so especially in my Scout, which is over here, you can see it's only a two-door. And so what ends up happening is you got to be able to get into the vehicle when the top's on, which means they're going to have to be able to rotate or to hinge forward in order to get by the back or get into the back. So that's kind of a feature to keep in mind. Now, the underside of the seats, you know, these are great new seats, and they're a little bit complicated. So I'll go through a little bit here what we have. So it's an 8-way seat. And what that translates into is 4 different motors. First off, the motor, there's one you can't see. It's in the back here that controls the back up and down, or forward and back. And then outside of that, there are 3 others, 1, 2, and 3. You can see this one right here drives this shaft in the middle, which slides the 2 mounting surfaces forward and backward. And then these 2 motors drive these little actuators here, which hinge the back up and down. And so that's the back one and then the forward one. And so if you take a look at the controls here on the side of this one, you have the forward and back, so 1, 2, then you have the main slider forward and back, that's 3, 4, up and down in the rear, 5, 6, up and down in the front, 7 and 8. The other good thing is, you know, when you get these from the junkyard or wherever else you get them, clean them off. I've done a little bit of you know, leather conditioner on them just to make them you know, clean them off, get some of the dirt off. And oftentimes you get them from things like that, and they're pretty well dried out, especially when you start talking about leather seats. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to connect this to power, and we're going to make sure that all of these motors drive correctly. Okay, so what we have now is we have the main power connector here, connected to a battery with just some alligator clip leads, just to test it out a little bit, but a little bit more about the overall connection scheme of this seat. Now there is a connector back behind here. I stuffed it kind of away. The seat has two different connectors on it, right? So there's this one here, and then there's the main power connector. It's important to note that the little one back here is the controller for the buckle pretension system, right? Which is this thing. it's connected to the buckle here. You can see there's cables that run down through this. There's a pulley inside of this hinge point right here, and then there's this canister here. This canister here contains an explosive material that will contract this and pull this portion of the seat belt back inside of it, and this is part of the crash system built into a lot of the newer vehicles. So not something that we're gonna put into our vehicle, my vehicle, and so I just have this basically tied off and left floating for now, which is just fine. Now, other than that, this is the passenger side, and so all there is in this one is that there's two connections. There's a power and a ground, and which are very kindly colored as red and black. And so let's go ahead and take a look at this and see what it does. I'm just gonna go through the motions of hitting the switches here and see what happens. So you can see here there's the front actuating, pushing the front side up and down. So you want to make sure that all this works. And then the back side, same story. He goes up and down. And then also for this, for the front and back, all of that seems to be working just fine on both sides. So we're relatively comfortable that both seats, and I've done this with both of them, that they're both in functioning order and worth putting in. About the worst thing you could do, spend all the time to install these seats and have them not work. So it's good to have that connection. Now, I've gone out on the internet and tried to find wiring systems for all of this, and I've yet to find anything out there that's usable. I haven't gone to the dealership, but there's a fair amount here, and don't let it all scare you. What you have here in the side piece where you have the or on the side where you have the controls, there's a couple of different things in here. So there's this control module right here. These motors are all DC stepper motors, and so they can't be driven just by 12 volts. You actually have to control them with a particular PWM scheme. Not something I want to get into right now, but they do require a controller, which sits right up in here. So if you buy these seats and this side is missing, or something else in this is not here, like the controller, I would I would highly suggest you don't do it, because some of the stock control stuff is gone and they won't work quite right. So these, however, are in perfect working order. Now, it's worth noting that on the driver's side, there's a couple of extra wires in the connector. We'll look at those in just a second here. Okay, so here is the driver's side power connector, main connector, and what you can see here is there's a couple of extra wires in this, right? So there's this one connector, right, or one wire right here, black with a white stripe, and then there's another small black wire in connected to the ground side. Most likely, and this is a bit of a guess, but most likely what this is it's a communication line. They're very small wires, which means they're not going to be able to handle much current. Now, where there's some wires that go to, as you can see, this wire that goes down through the seat. I'm guessing this has got a little bit of a proximity sensor, basically stating that, or telling the computer in the car that there's somebody in the seat, and it probably has some lockouts, some safety lockouts in that. There's no computer running in my Scout, and so I don't care. So those things won't be connected, and I'll just be connecting the power and ground on this side as well. Okay, so just a little bit about the Scout here, and this is just the kind of thing that you have to pay attention to when you're installing seats into a vehicle. Like I said before, I have a lot of space. You can see that the seats in the Scout sit up on top of a pedestal, and so what ends up happening is there's a lot of room for play down below. There's also a fair amount of room above. So in a lot of vehicles, especially if you try and do retrofit seats into a car, this ends up being a bit of a pain, because you can get seats that are too big or too small pretty easily. But what we're going to do is we're going to pull this seat out of here, get some dimensions off of that bottom pedestal, and see if we can figure out how the best way is to install these inside of here. Okay, so I got the old seats out. As you can see, these are kind of some old ratty seats. They got a nasty cover on them. So what I noticed first of all is over here. You can see that the box isn't symmetrical. The box that it sits on. So the distance from the body to here and from the body to here, this one's taller than this one. So what I've done is I've put it on shims to try and figure out what this angle is. You can see that I can put the angle finder over here on the edge to get an idea of what vertical is, and that's just about straight up and down. I then hang it up underneath here to figure out how far off, and we can see that we're about 5 degrees off. So we know that regardless of how big our box ends up being, we have to go 5 degrees up when we go towards the center console. This is the driver's seat, by the way. Okay, so here's a shot of the driver's side. As you can see, the hole over here is very similar to the one on the passenger side. This bracket ended up being a little bit different. I was able to use just a single piece underneath to hold up this side, make it rigid. And on the other side, the cutout is so wide down here on the floor that the way the metal was bent, there's no real place for a bracket right there, and so I'm gonna have to make a bracket and mount it down inside of here underneath the sheet metal that I put in. But on the driver's side, you can see that it fit nice up under there, a little bit offset from the edge, but it'll still be plenty strong enough there. So that's the driver's side. Okay, so here we are. We're all welded in place, strapped on the .023 wire, and went in here and stitched all this in. So this is all completely done up and ready to go. So that's this side. Now the other thing I did was, a lot of times I try to, when I've done this in the past, try to keep stock mounting holes. Well, clearly that wasn't the case here, where we had to do so much modification. So I went ahead and filled the old holes. That's 2 of them there. There's one up underneath that little grounding rod I made, and one over here underneath there, just to make sure that those things don't just rust through. So anyhow, that's it. Now on to the other side. As you can see, it's still just barely tacked on. We'll go get a better view. Okay, from the other side here, you can see, and this is the driver's side bracket that I just set in here to just kind of test fit. And so what I've done is I've cut a couple of pieces here and have just tacked them into place just to make sure everything fit okay, and looks like everything's going to land in here. I placed the seat in here before just to make sure. Now I'm going to go ahead and weld these in and cut the last piece for right up in here. So I'll be back in a minute. Alright, so here we are. We got all these pieces now all tacked in and ready to go, all cut out and happy. And so we're going to go ahead and stitch this guy in and get him all zipped up and ready to go. Okay, little welding tip for everybody here. It's worth noting that when you guys watch this on TV, that the guys that do the body work, this is an incredibly arduous process. It takes a long time. This is where they fast forward through it and make it look really good. But what you can see here is that you do what's called stitching, and you come along the sheet metal, kind of tacking it in place about every inch or so, and then you kind of start filling it in between, just one little spot at a time, until the sheet metal is completely, or the bead is completely run across the seam. And it takes a long time, but what it allows your metal to do to be able to expand and then shrink with the heat, being as though you're adding just a little bit of heat, one little dot at a time. So anyhow, just a little bit of added welding tips to you. Hope this is helpful. Okay, so here we are, all filled in on both sides, and I got it taped off a little bit. I'm going to just spray a little bit of paint down on it to to protect it a little bit. Just a little bit of plug for my new favorite product. This is Rust-Oleum's truck bed coating. This stuff's fantastic. It's a little pricey, about $8 a can, but it goes down pretty easy. It's pretty forgiving, and it's pretty tough too. So I like it. We'll get this sprayed. Okay, here we are. We're all painted up. Everything is copacetic and into its little grooves and spots. We're bolted down. Didn't paint the outside because I got some other work to do there at some point, and so I'll go paint over there when I come across that. But for right now, these are mounted in, bolted on. Next thing we got to do is throw on the seats. All right, here we are. Both seats are in. As you can see, they just kind of mounted, bolted right down onto the onto our frames and tucked their way into there. Both are good. Unfortunately, I don't have the power run yet. That'll be next. However, here we are, a Scout with a couple of pretty cool GTO seats in it. So we'll got to do the center console with power, so we can get the power seat of it all working, and then also I need to do new seat belts as well because the old ones don't fit. So that's next. Okay, so now I have them all wired up and in. Ran the power down. You can see I kind of just ran it on the outside because there's no carpet or anything to put it in, and I ran it all inside of this this protector, plastic protector stuff. But this is all screwed down and loaded in. I actually brought a whole lot more down here than I had originally planned. Let's see, I have 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 different connections coming down. A couple of speaker wire because I'm putting in a center console that has a radio in it. A large power cable for running an amp, and then a couple of other a couple of other wires here for power for whatever else. One of which is going to be the power for the seats, which is this right here, and you can see I split it out. One going to this seat, the other one going back underneath this seat, and then brought the grounds out right here. So, with that said, let's turn the key on. And now we should have full motion. And we do. So it everything goes the way it's supposed to go. Clears well on the inside of the roll bar there. So it is all 100% up and running and happy. So they fit well, they work well, and there you go, done and done. All right, here it is from the side. Everything happy and good. We had originally put in a 10 amp fuse for this. Turns out 10 amps isn't quite enough. As we were both in here, I had a buddy of mine in here, my son, and we were going back and forth and up and down just testing all the motions, and it ended up blowing the 10 amp fuse. So I went with the 15, and now it works perfectly. So I get my full range of motion on all motors, and fits perfectly. So I guess at this point we're just off to the races. So it didn't affect the way it runs. Perfect.